Welcome to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. I'm Melissa Joy, a certified financial planner and the founder of Pearl Planning. My goal is to help you streamline and organize your finances, navigate big money decisions with confidence, and be strategic in order to grow your wealth. As a woman, you work hard for your money, and I'm here to help you make the most of it. Now, let's get into the show. Welcome back to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. I can't think of a topic that is constantly changing as much as student loan payments when it comes to personal finance. And so today, because this topic is ever evolving, so complex, so many things to consider, so much future forecasting as well, which is very difficult to predict and very unpredictable. We're going to be talking about student loans with a personal finance expert who loves to dive deep into student loans. So my guest today is David Gourley. David is a former teacher, and he turned into a financial planner because of this topic, learning about student loans, public student loan forgiveness. He's a past guest on the podcast, and in June of 2024, he founded K-12 Planning, which is a financial planning company for educators. David, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much. It's great to be back and great to see you.
Well, when it comes to student loans, a year and a half is like a decade's worth of new news. So we talked, and we'll make sure to link to our past episode. But I think we need a fresh set of eyes and a fresh perspective when it comes to the student loan landscape, both for current people who owe on student loans, as well as those of you who are considering student loans to help pay for your college or your kids' college. So I'm so glad to have an expert here today to discuss.
Yeah, we can dive right into it. So one of the biggest
Great.
things that I know people are worried about is public service loan forgiveness. And the good news on this is that it's not going away. It's not. There's a lot of information out there, and some of it's good and some of it's bad, right? But public service loan forgiveness is not being taken away. It's still a program that's working. People are still getting their loans forgiven. And under the public service loan forgiveness umbrella, all of the loans are forgiven federally tax-free, which is big. And in 49 states, tax-free, not Mississippi. Why? I don't know. But Mississippi taxes PSLF. So that's kind of a big thing. The other part of that will become interesting to see what happens in the future is who qualifies for public service loan forgiveness. So there's kind of a push right now to undermine some of the current legislation that's out there and say, hey, we say nonprofits qualify, but okay, who is a nonprofit, right? That could be an interesting thing that's coming up in the future. But I work with a lot of educators. I think that most of them are safe as far as public service loan forgiveness. Anybody who works for the government, all of that seems to be safe right now. So that's a good spot to be for a lot of people and can really save a lot of money going down that path.
So public student loan forgiveness, tell me what the rules are today. So the rules haven't changed yet, right? You working for a nonprofit. So a lot of educators obviously are an area of passion for you. So working for a university, working for a public school district, a lot of medical service providers are working for nonprofit health systems.
Right.
If you work for just a plain old 501c3 nonprofit, all of those count, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the other rules are that you have to make 120 qualifying payments. A qualifying payment is determined as one that's under the income-driven umbrella. So the income-driven repayment plans, there's a bunch of them out there. We'll talk about that here in a minute with some changes. You have to be work employed by a qualified employer. And then during that time,
and you have to work full time, right? Like sometimes I've had people that were part-time employees, like at a church, let's say, or a nonprofit. There's some work requirements that come in there as well.
The official language on that is that you have to work for 30 hours per week or full-time as determined by your employer. So basically, at the end of the day, one of the things I tell people that's kind of interesting is when you have to get this thing called an employer certification form to have signed off to send to the Department of Education to get your credits to count for public service loan forgiveness. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is what your employer will sign off on. So if you don't know if you qualify or not, submit the form and find out. If you only
Okay.
work 25 hours and you're part-time, guess what? If they sign off on the form, then you're good. So just if you're questioning it, I always say, hey, what's the worst that can happen? They tell you no. Okay, then you're in the exact same boat that you are today. But maybe they sign off and say you're good, then you get some credits that you didn't have before.
Very interesting. I think, even if you're negotiating with an employer that happens to be in a nonprofit, I'd be like, can this be a consideration of my hire to sign off on this? Not to
100%.
get circumvent the rules, but to, just know up front.
Yeah, you want to. One of the big things I always tell people too is that it's kind of like whenever you play any game, the people that know the rules of the game are a lot more likely to win the game than the people that don't know the rules, right? And student loan forgiveness and student loans in general kind of have a set of rules that go along with them that's similar to a game. And so the people that do know them and can navigate around them all legally, we don't want to do anything illegal, but you can kind of bend the way that student loans operate as far as repayment plans, as far as how you file your taxes, when you file your taxes. There's a lot that goes into it that can determine your actual payment amount, and then from there, qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. For example, here's one that a lot of people don't know. You mentioned working at a university, but if you're an adjunct professor, your time in the classroom, a lot of the universities and that I've had people sign up, get employer certifications for, will sign off that they only count the time that you were in the classroom. But one of the rules on PSLF is that you actually get a 3.35 multiplier for every hour that you're in the classroom that they should be signing off on. So if you're working 10 hours in the classroom, then 10 times 3.35, you got 33.5 hours that's per week. And so that qualifies as a full-time, you know, full-time employee, and you should be getting credit for that for public service loan forgiveness. Little things like that a lot of people don't know, right?
I didn't know that. So thank you, David. This is exactly why I think in student loans in particular, um, general financial planners may have some knowledge. I think we all have some knowledge, but this is a very complex area. So going to an expert is, in my mind, time and money well spent.
I agree, because the other part is that if you do a lot of these things incorrectly, it can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. One example of that right now, when we talk about changes, um, there's a subset of people who took out loans for their kids already. We call these parent plus borrowers. And if you're a parent plus borrower right now, before July of 2026, July 1st, you have to do this thing called a consolidation if you want to have any access to an income driven repayment plan ever again. So that's kind of crazy, right? Because you're going to be cut off from access to any income driven repayment plan ever after July 1st of 2026 if you don't consolidate your loans. I see Parent Plus borrowers with hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans all the time. And if they did not do that, they would be put into the standard repayment, and their monthly payment could be something in the ballpark of 1,500, 2,000. It's not going to be based on income. It's going to be based on the terms. But they might do like an extended repayment plan where they'll drag it out over time, but no forgiveness options would be available anymore. If you get the
So if sitting with your kid is a junior and you've been using Parent Plus loans, are you out of luck because they're not going to be that your loans aren't going to be done by the time the consolidation deadline hits?
Yeah. Yeah. So, they have to be in a position where you can work with the loans. And so if a kid's still in school, usually what will show on the file is an in-school deferment, basically. Like it'll say in-school status. And so, yeah, there's a really good chance that you wouldn't be able to get those loans to basically break them out and consolidate them.
Okay.
Um, and that's a tough part, right? That's for people that are kind of on that bubble or still taking out loans right now. If you take out a loan after July 1st of 2026, then whether it's for yourself or if you're doing it as a parent, that has big ramifications on the repayment plans that are available to you moving forward. Because there's a new repayment plan that's coming out in July of 2026 called the Repayment Assistance Program, I believe. RAP is what
Wrap.
the
Yeah.
acronym is RAP. And if you take out a personal loan for yourself after July of 2026, you will only be allowed to be in that wrap repayment plan. But if you stop taking out loans before that, then you have options to get into like IBR. And right now there's pay and ICR are still available as well, but those are going to be closed off by 2028 and they're all going to be consolidated down into IBR. Okay? So,
and IBR means that it matters how much you're making, and if you make less, your payments may be less.
correct. And wrap is the same way, honestly. So the wrap gets a bad rap, but that's kind of my joke. But wrap
Dad jokes.
it's got a lot of negative press, but it's actually still a pretty decent repayment plan. The IBR has an old version and a new version, and it's all based on if you took out loans before 2014 or after 2014. And so if you were on the old version of the IBR plan, wrap is a better deal. It's actually a better repayment plan for most everybody. If you were on the new version of IBR, then you don't want to be on wrap. The new version of IBR is better for most everybody. So it just kind of really depends on when you took out the loans. And so right now there's a lot of people that are in pay as you earn, and they will get consolidated into that new into the IBR plan. Well, pay was based on if you took out loans back in 2000, I think it was 2007 or 2008. Not sticking to my brain for some reason right now, but it was based on if you took out loans at that point in time. So there's a period between pay between 2007, 2008, and 2014 where you could be in this better repayment plan. But when you get automatically put into IBR, it's going to send you into the old IBR, which is going to increase your monthly payments, basically, is what's going to happen. And so at that point in time, it would be worth exploring, what does wrapped look like for you? Okay, so that's one part of it. And it gets complicated. I'm sorry. I will try to make it.
No, we got to go there. This is why we have you.
I will try to make it as not complicated as possible, but the problem is that it's so unbelievably complicated. So,
well, I'll just cut to the chase too. For clients that have student loans that have considerations for public student loan forgiveness or are in a place where we need some advice on kind of how to make the game plan to repay, David, and we will provide links in the show notes and mention it at the end, does this type of analysis for people. So there is a pathway. We're not going to solve all of your problems in this 30 minutes, but there is a pathway to getting more details personalized to you.
Yeah. Couldn't have said that better. It's worth work. You don't have to necessarily work with me. There's a lot of people that do this work, but I would definitely find somebody that can help with it because it gets so complicated so quickly, right?
It certainly does. So I interrupted you. Where are we going next in terms of the level of complexity?
So the next part of it is when we talk about some changes that are coming up, if you're not going down the public service loan forgiveness path, there's another thing out there to still get forgiveness called the IDR forgiveness. It's the long-term forgiveness. And IDR forgiveness was kind of originally set up to be for people that were on the income-based repayment plan. And because of COVID, there was I can't remember the act that this fell under, but right now it's all federally tax-free, all of the long-term forgiveness through the end of December 2025. Starting in 2026, this will be taxable again, right? Taxable.
And we're talking about people that have had loans for, is it 20 or 25 years?
Yeah. 20
Depending.
years. If you're on certain repayment plans, it's 20 years. If you're on other repayment plans, it's 25 years. Well, guess what? So pay in new IBR are 20 years. The old IBR is 25 years. Well, guess what? It gets more complicated. This is where I was mentioning that part. If you switch to wrap, it goes to a 30-year forgiveness term for the long-term forgiveness. 30 years.
Does it start a new term or it just says everything in the past plus whatever equals 30?
That's something I don't know 100%. I'm going to guess that the old credits will count. They have not specifically
TBD,
said
but
that. Yeah, I would imagine.
Sometimes you got to wait to find out.
Because the wrap repayment plan is not even out yet.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come out until July of 2026. So there's some things that we're going to have to find out. I have to imagine you can go on to Student Aid. There's a secret link, and I can give you the link to go in and find your counts for your long-term forgiveness. Basically, it'll show you all of those numbers, but they're hidden. It's a hidden link.
Okay, so
Um,
we'll get the secret link.
yeah,
How exciting.
somebody had it on Reddit, which is kind of crazy, and I found it there and used it once with a client. And I was like, oh wow, this is actually, it works. I
It's
couldn't believe
working.
it. So um, at the top of this thing, by the way, you have to check a box that says pretty print, PRETTY print. And there's a little box next to it, and you check it, and it turns it into readable, readable data. But it will show you kind of how many payments you've made towards the, you know, 300 that you might owe on an old IBR, for example. And so it'll say something like, you've made 244 payments out of the 300 necessary. You have this many more remain. So it's good information to have. But so I think that they're going to continue to count those old payments. And when you switch to RAP, though, instead of being where you could have it forgiven at 20 years or 25 years, it'll extend it out to 30 years. One
So
of the
that's
reasons why
360
this is,
payments.
what's that?
So we're looking at how many payments? Was this 360?
360.
Ooh, a lot.
So the reason why that's a big thing to consider is that if you're going for the long-term forgiveness and you're on old IBR, you could have a lower repayment by switching to RAP, right? You could have a lower repayment. But if you're going for that long-term forgiveness, it extends your timeline out for 5 additional years. So do you save more money by paying more per month now and having it forgiven at 25 years, or extending it, paying less and having it forgiven after 30 years? That's a big planning decision and can cost
Yeah.
a lot of money.
And are you saying that there's a tax bill at the end of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow in this case, if you're on these types of forgiveness, is that you actually pay the taxes for what's forgiven
Exactly.
as it's reported as ordinary income in that year?
Federal and state taxes reported as ordinary income on top of your other income. So somebody
That's a wrinkle.
who's making good money and has this hit, could be shoved into very high tax brackets, especially if you're in a
And
high
by the
tax
way, we're
state.
not talking about private loans. These are loans. So if you go to a bank and get a loan that's not through the federal government or, is extra on top, those don't have that forgiveness function, correct? This is just for a cohort of loans that are subsidized or sponsored by the federal government.
Exactly right. Yep. So the next spot that I'll go to, and I'm not going to give specifics on this as far as numbers, but I think it's super important for people to look into this. But it's going to be the borrowing limits. So that's going to go into effect in 2026 as well. And that's a big
Right.
change that's coming kind of down the line here. I'll talk about a couple of them, but because there's been a lot of news about one of the things. I actually wrote a weekly newsletter about this 2 weeks ago, but it's the status that was based on professional status versus non-professional status. I don't know if you've seen
Right.
that. So
For grad school, right? We're talking grad school.
grad school and beyond. So, teachers and nurses were considered non-professional status, which doesn't mean you're not a professional. You're still a professional, but you can't take out as much in student loans as somebody who's in a doctor or somebody who's going into medicine. And there's a chart of all of them. I don't have that right in front of me of who qualifies. But essentially, there's going to be some borrowing limits, and this is extremely important to note because if you go beyond the limits, then the options are basically going to be that you're going to have to either fund this yourself or take out private loans. Private loans are an absolute beast, right? And so you can actually the person on the other side probably shouldn't do this, but you can have a cosigner on your private loans. And most people need to have a cosigner in order to bring the interest rate down, because I've seen interest rates in the 15 to 20% range on private
What a
student
gut
loans.
punch. That's awful.
It's insane. And that's, when you're, let's say 18 to 25 years old, if you're in the younger version of going to school, you don't, well, probably anybody, honestly, but I'm going to pick on these people especially. It's, if you haven't had a real job or a full-time job, if you don't have daycare, childcare, mortgage, all of the things that life kind of tacks on to you at different stages, you might not realize what a monthly student loan payment that's, $2,000 will actually cost you when you get to that time.
Yeah,
And
call it a rent check
yeah,
or mortgage. A low mortgage payment, probably fleeting nowadays, but that is a ton of money.
exactly. And I think that I was in the same boat. So that's why I'm saying I'm not necessarily picking on these people, but you don't understand what life looks like outside of, college at that point. And so I remember thinking, oh yeah, I can pay, $500 a month, no big deal. Well, guess what? When you actually get to our stages of life and beyond, $500 is hard to come up with sometimes, or it can be. And so, or 1,000 or 1,500, and that's on top of the federal student loan bill that you already owe too. So most of the time, people are taking out the federal side and then going to private. So, anyways, there's going to be some big, so there's going to have to be some big changes in the student loan
A
landscape.
readjustment.
A
Like the
readjustment.
landscape is big time changing. There's not as much free money. Not free money. There's not as big of a bucket. And I mean, part of me is like good because, if you go to a parent that hasn't been able to save for college, which like not been able, maybe it's not a priority. And then you say, oh, well, this 40,000 that we would have expected you to write a check for, you can just borrow it instead. But parents are having kids older and older in terms of when they have their first child. And so this is bumping up against your retirement. And guess what? You do not get, in most cases, forgiveness for these loans, and you cannot borrow money to pay for retirement.
Yeah.
It's just not an option. So part of me is like, good. I don't want parents to have six-figure debt to put 3 or 4 kids through school. But the other part of me is like, well, then how the heck is it going to work? And I think you need a lot of flexibility and some careful considerations when it comes to how you plan to pay for school.
I'm in the same boat. I think that a lot of times we as humans are very resourceful, right? And so if you've got your back against the wall and you say, hey, I can only take out up to, let's say, $100,000 maximum aggregate is kind of the non-professional graduate borrower. That's the maximum they can take out, $100,000. Well, guess what? Can you get a teaching degree with your master's and a specialist all in for under $100,000? I hope so. Maybe, and so you may have to get creative on where you go to school, where you're going to pick up additional credits, paying some out of pocket and some with loans. But I think it will overall help people to have some borrowing limits, because I've seen some extremely wild cases over the last couple of years where people have borrowed a lot of money and then get stuck with trying to figure out how we're going to pay this back. And
Yeah, it's in current system, it has been much easier to get in over your head for some types of borrowers, like grad students who are not going to transition to a super high paying job. So like the return on investment might be a little bit murkier, and especially parents borrowing to pay for school is just like, that's where they route you to. They're like, yeah, it's going to be great. You're going to borrow, 10, 20, 30, 50K. And then you're left with a huge bill when you think that, there may be multiple kids being considered multiple years, not everybody graduating in 4 years. And, when you aggregate those wild examples, it's 1.7 trillion of loans, second only to mortgages when it comes to our personal balance sheet. So, this is not just walking around money. This is like a big burden on U.S. households.
100%, 100%. So that's a big change coming up in 2026 is the borrowing limits. And I
It
think
feels pretty abrupt though. So that's the curiosity, is like, well, how is this going to work? Or if, I think there's some kind of limits being imposed on Parent Plus loans as well,
there
right?
are $20,000 per child per year with a maximum of $65,000 per dependent borrower, basically. So the thing is that you can still get it in over your head really quickly with a couple of children, but it at least has some boundaries there.
Yeah, I think I will mention, just because we're focusing on borrowing. Statistics say that it is a competitive environment for a lot of ideal students. If you're flexible on where you'll look for schools, you may be able to find better deals around where there's more grants or less cost, or less needing to borrow. So all is not lost. It is becoming more difficult to borrow, but for the families that aren't like this is the only school, private school with not a lot of grants or bust for one particular program, then you've got to look at that other side of the equation, which is what is the net cost of one school versus another for the programs that you're interested in pursuing as part of the factor if you don't have, just a giant bucket of 529 money kind of ready to spend.
Yeah. The thing that I hope doesn't happen, and I think it will probably, there's going to be some long-term effects of this. This is kind of off topic, but I think it's going to impact who has access to certain degrees, number one. And I think it's going to impact how many people pursue those degrees. And so then it's like, at that point, it's going to come down to, are as many colleges going to continue to offer certain degrees? It may have there's going to be a
Yeah.
trickle effect of this somewhere down the line, but overall it's just an important thing to know that's out there and kind of have on your radar. And to your point, a lot of this stems around, planning for retirement, planning for day-to-day, expenses. So there's a lot of things to consider.
So many. And that's why having somebody that can see really deep into these crevices of complexity, as well as someone who can look at your overall life and say, I don't
Yeah.
know if about, adding the size of a mortgage on top of your mortgage and everything else, or no, we can do this and it may take some, some strain now, but long term, this isn't going to harm you, or um, if not, let's look at plan B, or let's at least consider the consequences.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take it one more avenue here as we wrap up with some of the different, well, this one's actually not a change there. This is, but I think it'll help people. I'm going to pull up for anybody that's listening on the podcast. If you go to YouTube and watch this on the YouTube, you'll be able to see the actual image. But one of the things that's important to note is that the ability to file your taxes separately, if you're married filing separately is still available for student loans and can save people a tremendous amount of money in certain aspects. Now, one thing to note on this before we kind of dive into the full example here is that when you file separately to intentionally lower a student loan payment, it does not mean that, especially on like the old IBR and new IBR and pay, the interest is still accumulating, right? So if you intentionally lower your payment, you're only paying a small portion of the interest. The rest of the interest, if you've got a large student loan balance, the rest of that interest is still accumulating and growing. And so if you're not going for public service loan forgiveness, if you're not going for even for the taxable forgiveness, you have to kind of take into consideration this thing could balloon into such a giant, student
Debt.
loan debt
Yeah.
bubble. Yeah. That it might not be worth it unless you're going for that public service loan forgiveness. And so that's another big consideration, is to make sure that what you're trying to achieve actually aligns with, there's been a lot of times where I'll work with people and it's, hey, let's pay down some of the student loan debt and go for the long-term IDR forgiveness. So that way you don't have as big of a tax bill at the end. So it's kind of this balancing act. But in this particular example, I'm going to pick on a teacher. So this teacher who's married, and they've got a total income of $145,517. But the teacher on their own income, this is a pretty standard salary here I live in Missouri, so $65,330. This is a real life example, by the way. And I'm going to show you what this does on the tax side here in just a second. But this person is going to be on the new IBR, the pay. Those two have the very similar payment structure that goes along with them. And so everything I'll run through this a little bit, but it gets more complicated, which unfortunately is just kind of the nature of student loans. But we start with the family size, and on the married filing jointly, we can count the two parents, and they've got 3 children in this example. On married filing separately, you have to uninclude the other spouse. So they've only got a family size of 4 in that one. Then they use this thing called the Federal Poverty Guideline to actually determine what your payment's going to be. And you can go search Federal Poverty Guideline 2025. look up your family size and you can see what you can subtract from your adjusted gross income to get down to what they call the discretionary income. And there's actually a 1.5 multiplier. Like I said, I'm sorry that it gets complicated. But at the end of the day here,
You don't make the rules, you just explain them.
that's right. At the end of the day, the part that people need to know is that this $145,000 income, when they were filing jointly, they were going to have a payment of $742 a month. By filing separately and only showing the teacher's income of $65,330, they can lower their student loan payment down to $143 a month. Okay?
And this is a payment on how much had the spouse borrowed?
It doesn't matter. That's
Okay.
that's the craziest part, isn't it?
Interesting.
Because it doesn't matter what you're borrowing. This could be on
So
$40,000
$10,000 or $100,000.
or a million. It doesn't matter because it's all based on these income-driven repayment plans. It's all based on family and income only. It doesn't have any effect on how much you actually borrowed.
Okay.
It's kind of
Got
weird,
it.
right? So on this example right here, they are saving $7,200-ish per year by filing separately. So then the question becomes, well, how much would they pay additionally by filing separately, right? Because there's usually a penalty for filing separately.
On their taxes.
On taxes.
It's not that, yeah.
So I use this program called Holistiplan. Do you use Holistiplan?
Me too.
Yeah, Holistiplan,
yes.
Great. And so I threw this in here and ran the exact scenario. These are my names up here, so it's not a client name. So I ran this under my own profile, but this is an actual client scenario that they gave me permission to use. And if we roll all the way down here to the end, we can see this is the this column over here is the filing jointly, and they would have gotten back a refund of $1,270. And these are the two filing separately columns. Well, one person pays $3,246 additional dollars, but the other person gets back a refund of $4,116. This is the teacher that we put all the kids on. It ends up being a difference of $400 for the year, which is insane. So they're going to save $7,200 from the student loan side, and they're going to pay just an additional $400 in taxes. Now, the bigger that the income disparity is between spouses, the bigger of a tax liability you'll have, right? So
on the spouse that's filing as married, filing separate, that has a higher income in most cases.
Exactly. So one person's going to end up paying a lot more. The other person helps bring them down into a lower tax bracket. The whole reason why I bring that up is just because there are options, right? You don't have to. A lot of people will say, oh, we make this amount, we owe this amount. That's not always the way it works. There are, I'll say loopholes, but they're all legal. It's all within
planning
the realm.
Strategies is what we call that in our world.
That's way better. So there are strategies that we can use. There's also when you file your taxes, because they do this thing called an income recertification each year, and it happens at the same time. So whenever you took out your loans originally, you certified your income. Then every year after that, you're supposed to have to certify your income. We didn't have it for a long period of time during COVID, but they've started back up now. And guess what? If you file for an extension and don't file in April and do file your taxes in October, well, that opens up a 6-month window where if you do your income recertification in there, you were using the previous tax year's information and not the most current tax year's information. So if you had a giant income spike in one year and you wanted to just basically jump that, well, you could do that by filing your taxes at certain times. So again, some pretty intense strategies there that are really interesting, in my opinion.
I agree. They are interesting. They're also intimidating if you're not doing this every day. So having a student loan native explain it to us, I think is so valuable. And I love that you use that example. So if you go to find Pearl Planning and YouTube, if you're a regular audio listener, you can look at those examples in this episode around near the 30-minute mark. So what I know is that things are constantly changing. And if you're sitting in a situation where you have these considerations and options, it may be time for a review. Are you advising, David, for any clients that aren't, any people that are not subject to PSLF, and it may be murky whether they're going to hit the 20 or 25 or 30 year repayment target. Are there ever cases for people that are making good money that have that would qualify, are a good borrower, have a good credit rating, for them to uh, refinance their loans that at higher interest rates into private loans for a refi?
100%. So if the plan is to pay back the loans and not go for any forgiveness, then I think that getting it into the lowest possible interest rate is always going to be your best option. It's kind of like a house. If you can refinance from a higher interest rate to a lower interest rate, you're going to eventually either sell the house or pay off the loan. Kind of the same thing with the student loans. If you can, if you know that forgiveness is off the table, then
Which we
yeah,
don't know what future political regimes may bring to the table. Even a few years ago, it seemed more potentially realistic for a broader subset of people. But, that's something that might be a personal, kind of um, prediction. It's very difficult to see the future when it comes to that.
100%. And what I would say is that you've got to use the information that you have today to make a good decision. And it may come back that it's not a good decision in the future. We don't know that part, right? But if you're right now, there's some Parent Plus loans out there that were part of the 2023, 2024 cycle, I believe, or maybe 2024, 2025, but they were sitting above 9% interest rate. Well, you could probably, if you're a parent, there's a pretty good chance that you might have a good enough credit to get those over to a private bank and get those things lowered down to 5, 6, 7%. I would look into doing that for sure, especially at 9%. But
Right.
but again, to your point, you don't know what's going to happen. They could come down the road 10 years from now and say, you know what, we're going to get rid of every single student loan balance out there. I don't think that's going to happen, but you never know. And if you did make that move, well, then you'd be like, hey, that was a really dumb thing I did. But you can't do what ifs on that, right? It'd be really we could do that all day long with everything.
Right. There's so many different possibilities in a certain period of time. I guess for a cohort of people, because I have some clients that just say, "Hey, this batch of student loans, I'm just going to pay the minimums because I'm hoping there may be a change in, kind of perspective on forgiveness." But over time, making sound, solid financial decisions on refinances, things like that, it's not that you have to do everything perfectly. It's just, staying rational and staying on top of paying 9% for 10 years might be more penalizing than getting some forgiveness in the future. So
Yeah.
there's so much to talk about on this that I know we're going to be having you back someday soon, David. But in the meantime, how can people find you if they need a personalized analysis for their student loan situation?
Yeah, they can go to my website. So it's www.k-12planning.com. And there's a spot at the top that says student loans. And they can go in there and schedule a student loan consultation. That's the best route to go.
Yep, it's really easy to schedule just right off the website. So, David, thank you so much for joining us. May the times remain interesting as they always do, but I'm so glad to have, kind of a guide through this student loan morass. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Women's Money Wisdom podcast. If you found value in this episode, the best way that you can support the podcast is to forward an episode to a friend or leave a review. Go to proplan.com and the podcast link to get all the resources and links mentioned. This presentation by Pearl Planning is intended for general information purposes only. No portion of this presentation serves as the receipt of or a substitute for personal investment advice from Pearl Planning or any other investment professional of your choosing. Copies of Pearl Planning's current written disclosure brochure and Form CRS discussing our advisory services and fees are available upon request or on our website platform at pearlplan.com. The information that we share is meant to educate and inspire, not serve as personalized financial advice. Everyone's situation is unique, so be sure to consult with your own financial professional for guidance that fits your life. And just so you know, the opinions shared in this podcast are Melissa's own and those of our guests. They don't necessarily represent any organizations with which Melissa is affiliated. For more important disclosures, please go to our webpage at pearlplan.com.